What's up, everyone, and welcome to this week's Cybersecurity Weekly, where we review the security events that happened in the last week. As always, I've broken the stories down in the timeline, and there is a list of stories with time markers in the description below, so you can click on any of those time markers to jump around to any story that you want. If you find my work valuable, of course, I ask you to hit the like button and share this episode with anyone you know who can benefit from this information. Lastly, of course, if you have not already, please also consider subscribing to my channel. About 1,000 vessels have been impacted by a ransomware attack against DNV, one of the major maritime software suppliers. DNV GL provides solutions and services throughout the lifecycle of any vessel, from design and engineering to risk assessment and ship management. The Norwegian company provides services for 13,175 vessels and mobile offshore units, or MOUs, amounting to 265.4 million gross tons, which represents a global market share of 21%. The ransomware attack took place on the evening of January 7th, and in response to the incident, the company shut down the IT servers connected to the ship manager system operated by the company. DNV reported that there are no indications that any other of its software or data is affected by the security incident, I guess up until now. DNV confirms its ship manager software was victim of a ransomware cyber attack on the evening of Saturday 7th January 2023. DNV experts have shut down the ship manager IT services in response to the incident. All users can still use the onboard offline functionalities of the ship manager software, reads a notice published by the company. The maritime software supplier launched an investigation into the incident with the help of global IT security partners. It is working to recover operations as soon as possible. The company also reported the incident to the Norwegian authorities. DNV is communicating daily, I say, with all 70 affected customers to update them on the findings of the ongoing forensic investigations. In total, around 1,000 vessels are affected, continues the statement. At this time, the company has yet to disclose the family of ransomware that have infected its systems. The Israeli mobile forensics firm Cellebrite is one of the leading companies in the world in the field of digital forensics. It works with law enforcement and intelligence agencies worldwide. One of the most popular services provided by the company is the UFED, stands for Universal Forensic Extraction Device, which is used by law enforcement and intelligence agencies to unlock and access data on mobile devices. Hacktivists argue that the tools have been used in the past against journalists, activists, and dissidents around the world. Many reports, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever that means, claim the technology provided by Cellebrite was used by governments to spy on journalists and citizens violating human rights. Cellebrite has to be aware of the human rights violations of its customers. Human rights advocated remarks the company has the responsibility to carry out due diligence on its government clients and monitor misuse of its technology. The company then became the target of activists and animated whistleblowers. The data of the Israeli company and of another Swedish forensics firm, MSAB, have been leaked online by the Enlace Hacktivist Collective with the support of a whistleblower and later through the DDoS secret platform. January 13, 2023, an anonymous whistleblower sent us phone forensic software and documentation from Cellebrite and MSAB. These companies sell to police and governments around the world who use it to collect information from the phones of journalists, activists, and dissidents. Reads the announcement published by Enlace Hacktivist on its page. Both companies' software is well documented as being used in human rights abuses. The leaks are available for download as torrents or direct download. Ooh. The archive shared by the activist via torrent includes the entire Cellebrite suite, along with a huge trove of files used for the localization of software and technical guides for customers. Security firm Avast has released a free decryptor for the BianLian ransomware to allow victims of the malware to recover locked files. The BianLian ransomware emerged in August 2022. The malware was employed in attacks against organizations in various industries, including manufacturing, media and entertainment, and healthcare. The security experts noticed that the Go-based ransomware was able to decrypt files at high speeds. Upon its execution, BianLian searches all available disk drives from A to Z and all files to encrypt. The malware targets 1,013 extensions that are hard-coded in the ransomware binary. The experts pointed out that the ransomware encrypts a portion of the files that starts from a fixed file offset, which is hard-coded in the binary. The experts noticed that the offset differs per sample. Once a file is encrypted, a ransomware appends the .BianLian extension and drops a ransomware note function.txt in each folder. Upon completing the encryption process, the ransomware deletes itself by executing the following command. Whatever the command is, the decryptor released by the experts only works with a known variant of the BianLian ransomware. For new victims, it may be necessary to find the ransomware binary on the hard drive. However, because the ransomware deletes itself after encryption, it may be difficult to do so. Reads the post published by Avast. According to Avast telemetry, common names of the BianLian ransomware file on the victim PC include a list that I don't have. When searching the ransomware binary, we recommend looking for the exe file in a folder which doesn't typically contain executables such as the temp folder, documents, or pictures. It is also recommendable to check the virus vault of your antivirus. The typical size of the BianLian ransomware executable is around 2 megabytes. Avast researchers stated that future releases of the decryptor will be able to recover files encrypted with newer versions of the BianLian ransomware. Like other decryptors, the BianLian ransomware one is available as a standalone executable. The decryptor also allows users with a valid decryption password and to back up encrypted files to data loss. For questions or comments about the Avast decryptor, email Avast, not me. The vulnerabilities discovered in the Netcomm routers are a stack-based buffer overflow and an authentication bypass, respectively tracked as CVE 2022-4873 and CVE 2022-4874. Both issues impact the Netcomm router models NF20 Mesh and NF20 and NL1902, running software versions earlier than R6B035. CVE 2022-4873 is an authentication bypass in Netcomm router models NF20 Mesh and NF20 and NL1902 allows an unauthenticated user to access content. In order to serve static content, the application performs a check for the existence of specific characters in the URL, .css, .png, etc. If it exists, it performs a fake login to give the request an active session to load the file and not redirect to the login page. CVE 2022-4874, authentication bypass in Netcomm router models NF20 Mesh, NF20, and NL1902 allows an unauthenticated user to access content, same as the previous one. In order to serve static content, the application performs a check for the existence of the specific characters in URL, .css, .png. If it exists, it performs a fake login to give the request an active session to load the file and not redirect to the login page. So I have to scratch my head. What is the difference between 4873 and 4874? The CERT Coordination Center also published an advisory to warn of attacks chaining the two issues to achieve remote code execution on vulnerable systems. Netcomm router models NF20 Mesh and NF20 and NL1902, you should know them by now, running software versions earlier than R6B035 contain two vulnerabilities. Reads the advisory. The two vulnerabilities, when chained together, permit a remote, unauthenticated attacker to execute arbitrary code. The advisory pointed out that once the attacker has obtained unauthorized access to affected devices, he can use those entry points to gain access to other systems on the network or compromise the availability, integrity, or confidentiality of data being transmitted from the internal network. The flaw was discovered by Brendan Scarville, who also published a proof of concept to show how to chain the two vulnerabilities to achieve unauthenticated remote code execution. So if you got Netcomm, you know what to do. Researchers from Mandiant reported that suspected Chinese threat actors exploited the recent patched CVE 2022-42475 vulnerability in FortiOS SSL-VPN as a zero-day. According to the security firm, the vulnerability was exploited in attacks against a series of targets, including a European government, which probably Ukraine, entity, and a managed service provider located in Africa. I'm not saying I know it's Ukraine, I'm just saying, hey, who else is under attack all the time? The attacks took place as early as October 2022. The issue was addressed by Fortinet in December, and evidence gathered by the experts suggested that they are part of Chinese cyber espionage operations. In December, Fortinet urged its customers to update their installs to address an actively exploited FortiOS SSL-VPN vulnerability, again CVE 2022-42575, that could be exploited by an unauthenticated remote attacker to execute arbitrary code on devices. The flaw is a heap-based buffer overflow that resides in FortiOS SSL-VPN-D. The vulnerability allowed unauthenticated attackers to crash targeted devices remotely or, again, gain remote code execution. A based buffer overflow vulnerability CWE122 in FortiOS SSL-VPN may allow a remote unauthenticated attacker again to execute arbitrary code on command or commands via specifically crafted requests. Reads the advisory published by the security vendor. Fortinet is aware of one instance, where this vulnerability was exploited in the wild, but they just said numerous instances or against multiple agencies. ManageEngine announced to have identified a new strain of malware tracked as I guess that's Bold Move. The experts discovered a Windows and a Linux variant of Bold Move. The latter was specifically designed to target FortiGate firewalls. This incident continues China's pattern of exploiting internet-facing devices, specifically those used for managed security purposes like firewalls and IPS/IDS appliances, etc. These devices are attractive targets for multiple reasons. Of course they are. First, they are accessible to the internet, and if the attacker has an exploit, they can gain access to a network without requiring any victim interaction. Reads the report published by ManageEngine. This allows the attacker to control the timing of the operation and can decrease the chances of detection. The threat actors demonstrated to have an in-depth understanding of devices and undocumented proprietary formats to develop the zero-day exploit. Bold Move is written in C. The researchers pointed out that they have not directly observed exploitation of the vulnerability. However, they noticed that samples of the Bold Move Linux variant was designed to contact command and control IP addresses listed by Fortinet as being involved in exploitation. Bold Move is able to gather system info on the infected device and execute commands sent by the command and control server. And an extended version of Bold Move malware supports a command to modify proprietary Fortinet logs on the system. Cisco fixed a high-severity SQL injection flaw tracked to CVE 2023-20010 with a CVSS score of 8.1 in Unified Communications Manager and Unified Communications Manager Session Management Edition. Unified Communications Manager solutions provide reliable, secure, scalable, and manageable call control and session management. Cisco Unified supports industry standards, a wide range of gateways, and a broad ecosystem of third-party integrations and solutions plus partners. The vulnerability CVE 2023-20010 resides in the web-based management interface, because they always do, of Cisco Unified Communications Manager and Cisco Unified Communications Manager Session Management Edition, and authenticated remote attacker can trigger it to conduct SQL injection attacks on a vulnerable system. This vulnerability exists because the web-based management interface inadequately validates user input, because they always do. An attacker could exploit this vulnerability by authenticating to the application as a low-privileged user and sending crafted SQL queries to an affected system. Reads the advisory published by the IT giant. A successful exploit could allow the attacker to read or modify any data on the underlying database or elevate their privileges. The flaw impacts Cisco Unified CM and Unified CM SME versions 11.51, 12.51, and 14. The company advises customers to upgrade to an appropriate fixed software release, as reported in whatever the table was in the original article. The company states that there are no workarounds to address this vulnerability, so oops. The flaw was discovered by Jason Crowder of Cisco Advanced Security Initiatives Group, meaning there was an inside find. And Noah Lab. The Cisco PSIRT is not aware of attacks in the wild exploiting this vulnerability. Cisco is warning of a critical vulnerability tracked to CVE 2023-20025 with a CVSS score of 9.0 that impacts small business RV016 and RV042 and RZ042G and RV, I think I said Z, but I meant V082 routers. The IT giant announced that these devices will receive no security updates to address the bug because they have reached end of life. Good for you. The flaw is an authenticated bypass issue that resides in the web-based management interface of the routers. An attacker, an unauthenticated remote attacker, can exploit the CVE 2023-20025 flaw to bypass authentication on vulnerable devices. I said bypass authentication on vulnerable devices. The flaw is due to improper validation of user input, because of course it always is within incoming HTTP packets. An attacker could trigger the flaw by sending a specially crafted HTTP request to the web-based management interface. A successful exploit could allow the attacker to, like I said, bypass authentication and gain root access on the underlying operating system. Reads the advisory published by the company. Cisco has not and will not, I say will not, release software updates that address this vulnerability because the devices are end of life. There are no workarounds that address this vulnerability except taking that device, throwing it in the garbage, and getting a new one. The communications technology firm said that there are, no workarounds to fix this flaw. I think I pretty much said that and said what to do. However, admins may disable remote management and block access to ports 443 and 60443, which, that sounds kind of like a workaround. Cisco also addressed the remote command execution vulnerability tracked to CVE 2023-20026 with the CVSS score of 6.5 that impacts Cisco Small Business RV016, RV042, RV042G, and RV082 routers. This vulnerability is due to improper validation of user input within incoming HTTP packets. An attacker could exploit this vulnerability by sending a crafted HTTP request to the web-based management interface. Reads the advisory. A successful exploit could allow the attacker to gain root-level privileges and access unauthorized data. Ooh. To exploit this vulnerability, an attacker could or would need to have valid administrative credentials on the affected device. So, yeah. Cisco will not release software updates that address this vulnerability too. It also provides the same mitigations that address the CVE 2023-20025, which was Blockport 443, and I think it was 60443. The company PSRT is aware of the availability of a proof of concept exploit code for these flaws, so be on the lookout. The Cisco PSRT is not aware of any malicious use of the vulnerabilities that are described in this advisory, and they're probably not looking for any because, again, it's end of life. Researchers from Hermetic found a remote code execution flaw dubbed Emoji Deploy that impacts Microsoft Azure services and other cloud services, including function apps, app service, and logic apps. The issue is achieved through CSRF, or cross-site request forgery, on the ubiquitous SCM service Kudu. Kudu is the engine behind a number of features in Azure App Service related to source control-based deployment and other deployment methods like Dropbox and OneDrive Sync. An attacker can exploit the flaw to deploy malicious zip archives containing a payload to the victim Azure application. Ooh. The Emoji Deploy flaw can allow attackers to gain remote code execution and a full takeover of the targeted application. The issue can be exploited to execute command as www users, steal sensitive data, conduct phishing attacks, and perform lateral movement to other Azure services. The vulnerability enables RCE and full takeover of the target app. The impact of the vulnerability on the organization as a whole depends on the permissions of the application's managed identity. Raise a post published by Hermetic. Effectively, applying the principle of least privilege can significantly limit the blast radius. Attackers can exploit the CSRF vulnerability in the Kudu SCM panel to perform cross-origin attacks by issuing a specially crafted request to the /app/zip-deploy endpoint. The request contains the malicious zip file encoded as a body and set the content type header to text/plain. The request is flagged as standard by the browser and is accepted, allowing to deliver the malicious archive, in other words, an ASPX web shell, and gain remote access. The victim navigates to your payload on your host domain with the origin regex bypass, victim.scm azure websites.net _ blah 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 blah, states a report, access the web shell, and run code on the victim. On October 26, 2022, the Hermetic research team reported the vulnerability to MSRC November 2nd, 2022. MSRC first responded under review November 3rd, 2022. Microsoft's bounty program awarded $30,000 bounty for that. December 6, 2022, Microsoft released a global fix. January 19, 2023, Hermetic made the public disclosure. An international law, that was basically the whole timeline. An international law enforcement operation conducted by authorities from Bulgaria, Cyprus, Germany, and Serbia, supported by Europol and Eurojust, has dismantled a cybercrime ring involved in online investment fraud. The European police have supported this investigation since June 2022 following an initial request from German authorities. The suspect used advertisements on social networks to lure victims to websites covertly operated by the criminals, which offered seemingly exceptional investment opportunities in cryptocurrencies because, of course, they always do. Reads the press release published by Europol. The gang was using call centers to lure victims, come to me, my child, into investing large amounts of money, $5, $10, into fake cryptocurrency schemes. The suspects used advertisements on social networks to lure victims to websites covertly operated by the criminals, which offered seemingly exceptional investment opportunities in the cryptocurrencies. According to the press release published by Europol, 261 individuals, perps, scammers, crooks, have been questioned, some of whom are awaiting prosecution. 42 in Bulgaria, 2 in Cyprus, 3 in Germany, and 214 in Serbia. So Serbia seems to be either that's where the mastermind was, or that's where they kind of farmed out all of their work to suckers. The police searched 22 locations, not 222, 5 in Bulgaria, 2 in Cyprus, 15 in Serbia, including 4 call centers and 11 residences in Serbia. Okay, so the call centers were located in Serbia, hence the high number of people. 2 residences in Cyprus, 2 companies, and 3 residents in Bulgaria. So either Cyprus or Bulgaria seems to be where the kingpin resides. The police also seized 3 digital wallets containing about $1 million worth of cryptocurrencies. about $54,000 in cash, 3 cars, computers, and backups and documents. Seizures include 3 hardware wallets with about $1 million in cryptocurrency on it and about 50 grand in cash, 3 vehicles, electronic equipment, and data backups documents. Continues the press release. Most victims, mainly from Germany, were initially lured into investing low sums. Then they were persuaded to make transfers of higher amounts. So I guess they started off with $5-10 and then they went up to 50 grand or whatever. The financial damage to German victims is over 2 million euros. Bad news is that this is the tip of the iceberg because a large number of frauds were unreported by the victims. For this reason, overall financial damage could be in the hundreds of millions of euros. Researchers at the security firm Orca discovered that 4 different Microsoft Azure services, we were just talking about the Microsoft app services being under attack or having an exploit that was fixed and then reported in January. Now we're talking about 4 different Microsoft Azure services that are vulnerable to server-side request forgery or SSRF attacks. Threat actors could have exploited the flaws to gain unauthorized access to cloud resources. Vulnerable services included Azure API Management, Azure Functions, Azure Machine Learning, and Azure Digital Twins. The researchers successfully exploited 2 vulnerabilities without requiring any authentication on the Azure Functions and Azure Digital Twins services. The attacks allowed the experts to send requests in the name of the server without even having an Azure account. The discovered Azure SSRF vulnerabilities allowed an attacker to scan local ports, find new services, endpoints, and files, providing valuable information on possibly vulnerable servers and services to exploit for initial entry and the location of potential information to target, reads the analysis published by Orca. The experts pointed out that the SSRF vulnerabilities can allow attackers with access to the host IMDS, or Cloud Instance Metadata Service, to retrieve detailed info on instances like their host name, security group, MAC address, and user data, and potentially retrieve tokens, perform lateral movement, and execute arbitrary code. Orca researchers did not manage to reach any IMDS endpoints due to various SSRF mitigations implemented by Microsoft. Organizations can mitigate SSRF attacks by validating all input and ensuring that servers are configured to only allow necessary inbound and outbound traffic. The researchers recommend adopting the principle of least privilege and keeping their system up to date and avoiding misconfiguration. After flagging the vulnerabilities to Microsoft, they were swiftly mitigated, concludes the report. The most notable aspect of these discoveries is arguably the number of SSRF vulnerabilities we were able to find with only minimal effort, including another SSRF vulnerability we found last year in Oracle Cloud Services, indicating just how prevalent they are and the risk they pose in cloud environments. The CVE 2022-47966 flaw is an unauthenticated remote code execution for Zoho, or its vulnerability in Zoho that impacts multiple Zoho products with SAML SSO enabled in the ManageEngine setup. The issue also impacts products that had the feature enabled in the past. The root cause of the problem is that ManageEngine products use an outdated third-party dependency, Apache Santuario. This vulnerability allows an unauthenticated adversary to execute arbitrary code when the above SAML SSO criteria is met. So I guess it says you had it in the past, which means you had it active once, you deactivated, but the configuration of that activation still stays around, and that's where the vulnerability seems to reside, or that's how they get access to it. Researchers from Horizon 3 attack team announced last week the development of proof-of-concept exploit code that they plan to release soon, along with technical details of the flaw. We have successfully reproduced this exploit and would like to provide additional insight into the vulnerability so users can begin to determine if they have been compromised. Reads the post published by the experts. In this post, they discussed the log entries present in the vulnerability. The researchers also provided indicators of compromise that can be used to determine vulnerable products. An attacker can exploit this vulnerability using a crafted SAML request with an invalid signature. The vulnerability is easy to exploit and a good candidate for attackers to spray and pray across the internet. This vulnerability allows for remote code execution as NT authority/system, essentially giving an attacker complete control over the system, continues the post. The experts explain that threat actors with elevated privileges could trigger the flaw to steal credentials and use them to conduct lateral movement. Horizon researchers have now released a proof-of-concept exploit for the CVE 2022-47966 along with technical analysis. The experts developed the proof-of-concept exploit by examining the differences between the Service Desk Plus version 14.003 and version 14.004. The vulnerability allows an attacker to gain remote code execution by issuing an HTTP post request containing a malicious SAML response. This vulnerability is a result of using an outdated version of Apache Santuario for XML signature validation, reads the analysis. One of the critical pieces is understanding that the information flow uses the client browser to relay all information between the service provider and the identity provider. In this attack, we send a request containing malicious SAML XML directly to the service provider, assertion consumer URL. Excuse me. The researchers tested their POC exploit against Endpoint Central. However, they believe it can work on many of the ManageEngine projects to share some of their code base with the Service Desk Plus or Endpoint Central. In summary, when Apache Santuario is less than version 1.4.0, the vulnerability is trivially exploitable and made possible via several conditions. The good news is that at the time of the report, researchers are not aware of attacks exploiting this vulnerability. However, researchers warn that threat actors can start attempting to exploit it soon. Researchers from Keyhoe NetLab 360 reported that unidentified threat actors using a new backdoor based on the US CIA project Hive malware suite. Hive provides a covert communications platform for a whole range of CIA malware to send exfiltrated information to CIA servers and receive new instructions from operators at the CIA. In April 2017, WikiLeaks published some documents about the project, describing it as a sort of malware command and control infrastructure used by the U.S. agency to control its malicious code and exfiltrate information from the target systems. One of the 360 Net Lab honeypot caught a suspicious ELF file on October 2021. The experts reported that the malware is spread by exploiting F5 zero-day exploits. The researchers noticed that the malicious code was contacting the IP address 45.9.150.144 using SSL with forged Kaspersky certificates. Additional analysis revealed that the malware borrows code from the Hive project that was leaked in 2017 as part of Vault 8 series. This is the first time Yet the experts captured a variant of the CIA Hive malware in the wild. The expert tracked it as XDR33 based on its embedded bot-side certificate CN equals XDR33. XDR33 is a backdoor born from the CIA Hive project. Its main purpose is to collect sensitive information and provide a foothold for subsequent intrusions, reads the analysis published by the experts. According to the researchers, the backdoor was developed to gather sensitive information and maintain persistence on the target infrastructure. XDR33 uses XTEA or AES algorithm for traffic encryption and uses SSL with client certificate authentication mode enabled to protect the traffic. The backdoor has two tasks, beacon and trigger. The former periodically reports sensitive information, or the beacon, periodically reports sensitive information about the device to the hard-coded beacon server, command and control server, and executes commands issued by it, while the latter, which is the trigger, monitors the NIC traffic to identify specific messages that conceal the trigger command and control server. Once the messages are received, the trigger communicates with the trigger command and control server and waits for the execution of the commands issued by it. Additional details are reported in the analysis published by the experts that also provide indications of compromise for this threat. FortiGuard Labs researchers discovered three malicious PyPI packages called Colors, Lib, HTTPS Lib, and Lib HTTPS on the PyPI repository that were uploaded by the same actor, Lollipop. The packages were discovered on January 10, 2023. The packages Colors Lib and HTTPS Lib were published on January 7, 2023, while Lib HTTPS was published on January 12th. The packages are designed to drop malware on compromised developer systems. The packages use an identical setup.py script that runs a PowerShell and runs a malicious executable, oxy.exe, hosted on Dropbox. The researchers noticed that the download URL has not previously been labeled as malicious, while the downloaded executable was identified as malicious by some security vendors. Upon executing the file, another binary named update.exe is executed in the temporary folder. The malware whack-attack Trojan that is dropped on the developer systems can perform a broad range of malicious activities and deliver additional malicious payloads. The author also positions each package as legitimate and clean by including a convincing project description. However, these packages download and run a malicious binary executable, concludes the report. Python end users should always perform due diligence before downloading and running any packages, especially from new authors. And as can be seen, published more than one package in a short period of time is no indication that an author is reliable. The Commission nationale de l'informatique et des libertés, CNIL, has fined short-form video hosting service TikTok €5 million, about $5.4 million, for violating cookie consent rules. French data protection watchdog claims that users are not able to refuse cookies as easily as they are to accept them. The ByteDance-owned company also failed to sufficiently inform the purposes of the different cookies. On December 29, 2022, the CNIL sanctioned the social network TikTok for a total amount of €5 million for two reasons. Users of TikTok.com, so not the app, just the website, could not refuse cookies as easily as they could accept them, and they could not and were not sufficiently informed of the purposes of the different cookies, reads a statement published by CNIL. Between May 2020 and June 2022, the CNIL conducted multiple audits on the TikTok.com website and on the documents requested from the company by the CNIL. The CNIL only assessed the website in an unauthenticated space, as I said, so the mobile app was not scrutinized. The restricted committee considered that making the refusal mechanism more complex actually amounts to discouraging users from refusing cookies and encouraging them to favor the ease of the accept all button, continues the statement. She concluded that this process violated the freedom of consent of internet users and constituted a violation of Article 82 of the Data Protection Act, since it was not as simple to simply refuse cookies as to accept them at the time from the online control in June 2021 until the implementation of a refusal button was done in February 2022. In December 2022, French CNIL fined Apple €8 million for not collecting the consent of iPhone French users using iOS version 4.6 before depositing and or writing identifiers that they used for advertising purposes on their terminals. Canadian Liquor Control Board of Ontario, the LCBO, the largest beverage alcohol retailer in the country, disclosed a mega card attack on January 10th, 2023 to their website. Please note, our website and mobile app are currently unavailable. We're working to bring them, or the mobile app as well. We're working to bring them back online, and thank you for your patience and understanding. Our in-store customer service remains unaffected. Threat actors compromised the Canadian Liquor Control Board of Ontario website and injected a malicious code used to steal the credit card data of its customers while checking out their orders. This is commonly known as a MAGA-cart attack, and I've done a number of videos about that. Most of you probably remember them. LCBO has experienced a cybersecurity incident affecting online sales through LCBO.com, reads a company statement. At this time, we can confirm that an unauthorized party embedded malicious code into our website that was designed to obtain customer information during the checkout process. Customers who perform payments on the company website between, now this is important if you've done this, January 5th, 2023 and January 10th, 2023 may have had their information compromised. Exposed data include names, email and mailing addresses, Aeroplan numbers, LCBO.com account passwords, and credit card information. The company pointed out that the security breach did not impact users that placed orders through the retailer's mobile app or vintageshoponline.com. The company is still investigating the attack to determine the impacted customers and notify them. Meantime, it has disabled customer access to both LCBO.com and their mobile app to conduct a forensics investigation. Canadian Liquor Control Board of Ontario recommends all customers who initiated or completed payment for orders on its website in the above period, again January 5th to January 10th, monitor their credit card statements and report any suspicious activity to their credit card providers. Trend Micro researchers reported that it is possible to abuse a legitimate feature in the development environment GitHub Codespaces to deliver malware to victim systems. Users can customize their project for GitHub Codespaces by committing configuration files to their repository, which creates a repeatable codespace configuration for all users of your project. Each codespace runs on a virtual machine hosted by GitHub. The Codespaces supports a port forwarding feature that allows users to access and debug a web application that's running on a particular port from their browser on a local machine. Trend Micro researchers pointed out that developers can share a forwarded port privately within the organization or publicly. A public port can be accessed by anyone that knows the URL and port number. Threat actors can abuse this feature to host malicious content and share links to these resources in their attacks. To validate our hypothesis of threat modeling abuse scenario, we ran, this is Trend Micro speaking, we ran a Python-based HTTP server on port 8080, forwarded and exposed the port publicly. In the process, we easily found the URL and the absence of cookies for authentication, reads the post published by Trend Micro. GitHub Codespaces typically forwards ports using HTTP, but developers can change any port to HTTPS if needed. Once a developer updates a publicly visible port to HTTPS, the port visibility will automatically become private. A quick look at threat intelligence platforms like VirusTotal will show the domain having no malicious history, diminishing the chances of blocking the download of malicious files if distributed via this domain using HTTPS. An attacker can create a simple script to automate the creation of codespace with a publicly exposed port and use it to host malicious content. Experts explain that the process consists in creating a web server with an open directory, serving the malicious files, and waiting for 100 seconds before deleting once they are downloaded. Using such scripts, attackers can easily abuse GitHub Codespaces in serving malicious content at a rapid rate by exposing ports publicly on their Codespace environments. Since each created Codespace has a unique identifier to it, the subdomain associated is unique as well. This gives the attacker enough ground to create different instances of open directories, Trend Micro continues. So, thank you, Trend Micro, for telling us all how to do it. Let's see what happens in the next couple of weeks when tons of other attackers start doing this. The good news is that the attack technique devised by the researchers has yet to be exploited in attacks in the wild. Yeah, but now you told us how to do it, so now a lot of people are going to do it. And it's just that you haven't found any attacks in the wild that use this technique. Doesn't mean that they're not being done. So cloud services offer advantages to legitimate users and attackers alike. It helps attackers scale their attacks quickly and easily, hide their tracks, and avoid detection by abusing legitimate services like GitHub Codespaces. The researchers concluded the features offered to legitimate subscribers also become available to threat actors as they take advantage of the resources provided by the CSP, which stands for Cloud Service Provider, in case you didn't know, concludes the report. The popular email marketing and newsletter platform Mailchimp was hacked twice in the past 6 months. The news of a new security breach was confirmed by the company. The incident exposed the data of 133 customers. Doesn't sound like a lot, but wait till you know who they are. Threat actors targeted the company employees and contractors to gain access to an internal support and account admin tool, so social engineering. On January 11th, the Mailchimp security team identified an unauthorized actor accessing one of our tools used by Mailchimp customer-facing teams for customer support and account administration. The unauthorized actor conducted a social engineering attack on Mailchimp employees and contractors and obtained access to select Mailchimp accounts, so they actually sought these accounts out, using employee credentials compromised in that attack. Reads the notice published by the company. Based on our investigation to date, this targeted incident has been limited to 133 Mailchimp accounts. The company added that there is no evidence that this security breach affected Intuit systems or other customer data beyond the reported 133 accounts. So there could be more coming, but right now they're stuck. They only know that it affected 133 accounts. Now, the malicious activity was discovered on January 11th, 2023. In response to the intrusion, the company temporarily suspended access for the impacted accounts. The company also notified the primary contacts of all affected accounts less than 24 hours after the initial discovery. According to TechCrunch, one of the compromised accounts belongs to e-commerce giant WooCommerce that has something like 5 million customers. In a note to customers, WooCommerce said it was notified by Mailchimp a day later that the breach may have exposed the names, store web addresses, and email addresses of its customers. Though it said no customer passwords or other sensitive data was taken, reads the post published by TechCrunch. WooCommerce, which builds and maintains popular open source e-commerce tools for small businesses, relies on Mailchimp for sending emails to its customers. So, WooCommerce has a Mailchimp account with newsletter lists and whatever that contains contact details and information about WooCommerce's customers, and now it's said to have 5 million customers. So that doesn't mean they have 5 million subscribers to the newsletter. They could have more, or they could have less. Mailchimp suffered a similar breach in April 2022. Threat actors gained access to internal tools of the email giant to conduct phishing attacks. That time, it was against crypto customers. Mergers and acquisitions. You probably heard the term before. And M&A is often associated with the business world, with industries such as finance, retail, technology, and more. But M&As are also common in the healthcare industry. And the question is how healthcare delivery organizations, or HDOs, can manage the risks associated with the process, specifically IT asset risks. The outcome of a merger or acquisition is relatively the same. The entities involved are combined or absorbed into one another and, by legal definition, become the same organization. So when they say combined or absorbed, if both companies have an HR department, the merged company will have one HR department, so people get axed. Same thing goes with IT. Now, a string of benefits can come with an M&A, such as increased profitability. If you don't know how they do that, just think back to my 2 HRs to 1 HR. They save on those salaries. They cut services, blah, blah, blah. Marketing strength or market strength. You shrink the actual competition by absorbing or merging with another company. Diversification of services. If you provide one service, the other company you're absorbing provides another service. Now, all of a sudden, you provide 2 services. And then lastly, acquisition of IT assets. However, the latter, the IT assets, introduces cybersecurity complexities that must be managed for the process to go smoothly. During the M&A process, the IT assets within those organizations transfer ownership and get absorbed into another system. In other words, an HDO asset inventory can drastically change overnight. And with new assets come new risks. However, the visibility gaps of existing cybersecurity tools mean these new assets go generally unmanaged. When assets go unmanaged, so do their associated risks, and things can take a turn for the worse, especially when talking about the healthcare industry. Some consequences include threats to patient safety and the leaking of confidential data, both of which jeopardize an entity compliance efforts, another consequence in itself. The healthcare industry is known to be heavily regulated due to its handling of highly sensitive information and the treatment of patients, so compliance must constantly be maintained. Yet during the M&A process, compliance efforts are threatened as visibility gaps mean HDOs don't actually know what risks they are undertaking when acquiring new assets. This presents opportunities for sensitive patient data to get leaked, as unmanaged assets may gain unauthorized access. Like if you don't know it exists or you don't know how to update or manage it, it just stays in the same version. All of a sudden, a vulnerability comes into play. Somebody hacks in, grabs the data, blah, blah, blah. Similarly, the acquisition of faulty or incompatible assets can compromise patient safety if they go unmanaged. Such assets can fail to operate as expected, which may interfere with the provision of patient care, such as delaying surgeries or patient diagnosis, should they fail to operate as expected. Cacti is an open source platform that provides a robust and extensible operational monitoring and fault management framework for users. Researchers from Centos discovered that the majority of Internet exposed Cacti servers are vulnerable to the critical flaw CVE 2022-46169, which is under active exploitation in the wild. The flaw is a command injection vulnerability that can be exploited by an unauthenticated user to execute arbitrary code on a server running Cacti, or Cacti, if a specific data source was selected for any monitored device. The flaw resides in the remote agent PHP file that can be accessed by any unauthenticated user. The vulnerability affects versions 1.2.22 and below. A command injection vulnerability allows an unauthenticated user to execute arbitrary code on a server running Cacti if a specific data source was selected for any monitored device, reads the advisory. The researcher noticed that most of the Cacti servers are running outdated versions, with only 26 servers running a patched version of Cacti 1.2.2.23 and 1.3.0. Most hosts running Cacti are in Brazil with 20.5%, followed by Indonesia, 12.37%, and the United States with 3.95%. The vulnerability was discovered by SonarSource researchers who provided details about the issue and published a video proof of concept demonstrating the exploitation of a server running a vulnerable version of Cacti. Shadow Server researchers reported that threat actors are actively exploiting the issue since January 3rd, 2023. In some attacks, attackers trigger the issue to deploy malware on the vulnerable hosts. Gray noise experts also observed attacks in the wild exploiting the flaw. On December 12th, 2022, the Cyber News research team discovered a publicly accessible database with 260 gigabytes of sensitive personal data belonging to myrocket.co, offering end-to-end recruitment solutions and HR services for companies in India. The leak is estimated to have affected nearly 200,000 employees and almost 9 million job candidates. Researchers warned that such data leaks are hazardous, as they might help threat actors craft targeted phishing campaigns, assist in forgery and identity theft, and trick companies into making payments. The company said the issue was caused by a misconfiguration and fixed the issue upon notification. The discovered database was not protected by authentication. The security loop resulted in millions of private documents being revealed to the public. Worryingly, it also allowed threat actors to modify the data, changing salary amounts and details of bank accounts used for salary payments. Researchers found about 435,000 payslips, 300 tax filings, 3,800 insurance payment documents, and 21,000 salary sheets belonging to various companies using the HR platform services. The database contained detailed, sensitive, and personally identifiable information of employees, including names, taxpayer information, personally identifiable identification numbers, emails, phone numbers, bank details, parent names, dates of birth, salaries, payslips, employee roles, insurance and tax information, work contracts, addresses, and even photocopies of personal documents such as driving licenses or voter IDs. Researchers could also see the data of around 9 million job candidates, including insecurely hashed emails, phone numbers, home addresses, and automatically generated resumes. The generated files included the hash names and contact information in plain text. Additionally, researchers found nearly 15 million entries of job interview-related information. Incidents like this are usually caused by misconfigurations and lack of proper access control while not monitoring sensitive infrastructure. The issue could have been detected and fixed sooner if the company had monitored its infrastructure, explained the research team. Researchers claim it is necessary to set up a separate user account for each employee who needs access to the data. Also, it's crucial to protect sensitive information by hosting it on servers that accept connections only from trusted internet IP addresses. Cyber News reached out to myrocket.co, and the company fixed the issue. The company representatives state that the underlying cause of the vulnerability was a newly created Kibana instance that had been incorrectly configured. To guarantee the safety of the user data, the company claims to have started an internal investigation of the matter. The open source JsonWebToken library is affected by a high severity security flaw tracked to CVE 2022-23529 with a CVSS score of 7.6. That could lead to remote code execution. The package is maintained by Auth0. It had over 9 million weekly downloads as of January 2022, and it is used by more than 22,000 projects. The flaw was discovered by Unit 42 researchers. It can be exploited by threat actors by tricking a server into verifying a maliciously crafted website or JsonWebToken, request. By exploiting this vulnerability, attackers could achieve remote code execution on a server verifying a maliciously crafted JsonWebToken request. Read the advisory published by Palo Alto Networks. With that being said, in order to exploit the vulnerability described in the post and control the secret or public key value, an attacker will need to exploit a flaw within the secret management process. JsonWebToken is an open source JavaScript package that allows users to verify and sign JSON Web Tokens. The flaw impacts JsonWebToken packages version 8.5 or an earlier version, and JsonWebToken package version 9.0.0 addressed the issue. For versions less than 8.5.1 of JsonWebToken library, if a malicious actor has the ability to modify the key retrieval parameter, referring to the secret or public key argument from the README link of the jwt.com verify function, they can gain remote code execution. Reads the advisory published on GitHub. You are affected only if you allow untrusted entities to modify the key retrieval parameter of the jwt.verify on a host that you control. Vulnerabilities in open source projects are very dangerous. Threat actors could exploit them as part of supply chain attacks that can impact any projects relying on them. Open source projects are commonly used as the backbone of many services and platforms today. This is also true for the implementation of sensitive security mechanisms such as JWTs, which play a huge role in authentication and authorization processes, concludes Palo Alto. Security awareness is crucial when using open source software. Reviewing commonly used security open source implementations is necessary for maintaining their dependability, and it's something the open source community can take part in. Security researcher Daniel Milicic discovered that the T95 Android TV Box he purchased on Amazon was infected with sophisticated pre-installed malware. This Android TV Box model is available on Amazon and AliExpress for as low as $40. The device came with Android 10 with working Play Store and an all-winner H616 processor. Milicic discovered preloaded malware in its firmware. Milicic purchased the T95 Android TV Box to run Pi-hole, which is a Linux network-level advertisement and internet tracking blocking application. After running the Pi-hole, he noticed that the box was reaching addresses associated with malware campaigns. After searching unsuccessfully for a clean ROM, I set out to remove the malware in a last-ditch effort to make the T95 useful. I found layers on top of layers of malware using TCP flow and nethogs to monitor traffic and traced it back to the offending process APK, which I then removed from the ROM, the expert wrote on Reddit. The final bit of malware I could not track down injects the system server process and looks to be deeply baked into the ROM. It's pretty sophisticated malware, resembling copycatting the way it operates. It's not found by any of the antivirus products he tried. If anyone can offer guidance on how to find these hooks into system server, please let me know. Here via PM is from the author or the researcher. The device uses an Android 10 operating system that was signed with test keys. The expert also discovered that it had the Android debug bridge reachable through the Ethernet port. The malicious code embedded in the firmware of the device acts like the Android copycat malware. The experts pointed out that all the antivirus products he tested were not able to detect the threat. Millisec also devised a trick to block the malware using the Pi-hole to change the DNS of the command and control server ycxrl.com to 127.0.0.2. Okay. Makes sense. He also created an IP table rule to redirect all DNS to the Pi-hole, as the malware virus whatever will use external DNS if it can't resolve. By doing this, the command and control server ends up hitting the Pi-hole web server instead of sending my logins and passwords and other personally identifiable information to a Linode in Singapore. Continues the expert. Watch out! The solution proposed by Millisec doesn't remove the malicious code or disable it, it just neutralizes it, interfering with its operations, making it basically contact itself as opposed to passing the information outside. In order to determine if the T95 Android TV Box has been infected, the researcher recommends checking the presence of a folder name. Millisec was not able to test other devices from the same vendor or model to determine if their firmware was infected. 2, because he probably had to then buy it and he didn't want to waste his money. Don't trust cheap Android boxes or AliExpress or Amazon that have firmware signed with test keys. They are stealing your data, and unless you can watch DNS logs, do so without a trace. Millisec concludes. So then he did a list of all the cleanup instructions, which is in the original article. The maintainers of the Git source code version control system announced to have fixed a couple of critical vulnerabilities tracked to CVE 2022-23521 and CVE 2022-41903 in their software. The flaws were discovered as part of a security source code audit of the source code version control system sponsored by the OSTIF, which was performed by a team of security experts from X41 and GitLab. The vulnerabilities can be exploited by a threat actor to achieve remote code execution. The vulnerabilities impact versions. All of these versions, I'm not going to read that list. The CVE 2022-41903 is an integer overflow in Git archive, Git log format that can lead to remote code execution in Git. Git is a distributed revision control system. Git log can display commits in an arbitrary format using the format specifiers. This functionality is also exposed to Git archive via the export substring Git attribute. When processing the padding operators, there is an integer overflow in pretty.c format and pad commit, where a size_t is stored improperly as an integer and then added as an offset to a mem copy. Reads the advisory for this issue. This overflow can be triggered directly by a user running a command which invokes the commit formatting machinery. It may also be triggered indirectly through Git archive via the export substring mechanism, which expands format specifiers inside of files within the repository during a Git archive. The maintainers of the project recommend users who cannot immediately update their install to disable Git archive in untrusted repositories to mitigate the CVE 2022-41903 flaw. The second issue tracked to CVE 2022-23521 is a Git attributes parsing integer overflow. This US CISA added the CentOS Web Panel 7 unauthenticated remote code execution flaw CVE 2022-44877 to its known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. The flaw impacts the software before 0.9.8.1147. It was addressed with the release of 0.9.8.1147 version on October 25th, 2022. The vulnerability was discovered by Newman, Tuberclay from Gase Security. Sorry if I butchered your name. Researchers warn that threat actors are actively exploiting the vulnerability in Control Web Panel. The exploitation attempts began on January 6, 2023 after a proof of concept Exploit code was published online. Login session index.php in CWP, aka Control Web Panel or CentOS Web Panel. 7. Before 0981147 allows remote attackers to execute arbitrary operating system commands, or OS commands, via shell meta characters in the login parameter. Reads the advisory published for this vulnerability. Researchers from Gray Noise and Shadow Server confirmed that threat actors are actively exploiting the flaw. Blah, blah, blah. There's a tweet. Heads up. We're seeing CVE 2022-44877 exploitation attempts for CWP, CentOS Web Panel, Control Web Panel instances. This is an unauthenticated RCE. Exploitation is trivial and a POC published. Exploitation first observed January 6th. Make sure to patch. Another tweet. According to Binding Operational Directive, we all know it, it's 2201, reducing the significant risk of known exploited vulnerabilities, FCEB agencies have to address the identified vulnerabilities by the due date to protect their networks against attacks exploiting the flaws in the catalog. Unless the unless the open directive, binding operational directive removes the vulnerability like they've done in the recent past, or just changes the due date. Experts recommend also private organizations review catalog and address the vulnerabilities in their infrastructure. CISA orders federal agencies to fix these vulnerabilities by February 7th, 2023, or else. And now again, the CISA added 2 new vulnerabilities to its known exploited vulnerabilities, so this is in addition to the web panel. The first issue is tracked to CVE 2022-41080. It is a Microsoft Exchange Server privilege escalation vulnerability. The issue can be chained with CVE 2022-41082. Proxy not shell to achieve remote code execution. The flaw was exploited by the Play ransomware group in a recent attack against the cloud services provider Rackspace. The ransomware attack took place on December 2nd, 2022. Threat actors exploited a previously unknown security exploit dubbed SSRF by CrowdStrike to gain additional access to the Rackspace hosted Microsoft Exchange. The new exploit chain bypasses Microsoft mitigations for proxy not shell vulnerabilities. Government experts believe that other ransomware gangs could exploit the same exploit chain in attacks in the wild because they're smart. The second flaw added to the known exploited vulnerabilities catalog is a Microsoft Windows Advanced Local Procedure Call, or ALPS, privilege escalation vulnerability tracked to CVE 2023-21674 with a CVSS score of 8.8. The flaw is a Windows Advanced Local Procedure Call elevation of privilege vulnerability that could lead to a browser sandbox escape. An attacker can exploit this vulnerability to gain system privileges. The flaw was addressed by Microsoft with the release of Microsoft Patch Tuesday for January 2023. The second vulnerability CISA added to its known exploited vulnerabilities catalog, or KEV, is a privilege escalation 0-day CVE 2023-21674 in the Windows Advanced Local Procedure Call. ALPS tagged as being exploited in attacks and patched by Microsoft during this month's Patch Tuesday. According to BOD 2201, reducing the significance, we all know this, whatever, it's got to be done by the due date. The due date, January 31st, 2023. And that's the news. Thanks again for watching. Don't forget to share and subscribe if you haven't already and you've actually made it to this part of the episode. And smash the bell if you haven't already. And again, if you made it this far. And I'll see you on the next episode. Take care.